Amidst the Storm. Prologue. Shadow was standing on the edge of the beach, her feet just deep enough to feel the wake of the waves as they washed and receded across the sand. It was a sensation she had become all too familiar with, having spent so many of her years on this lonely, isolated island. Her feet pressed flat against the smooth, damp sand, her toes feeling every grain as it rubbed against them. The impressions underfoot that could disappear in an instant washed away as if they had never been there at all. Half buried, she had stopped fighting it after only a few minutes and had come to enjoy her time standing here, alone, watching the horizon for something she couldn't see and that couldn't see her. She couldn't see the world outside, and the outside world couldn't see her, but she preferred it this way. It was quiet, despite the numerous others living on the island with her, and it was peaceful, despite the sometimes organized chaos that ensued with every passing day. It was the type of chaos that kept people sane, the type of peace that one could feel amongst friends or peers, no matter the length of time they had spent together in close proximity. Shadow had been on this island longer than anyone. Practically what felt like an eternity, but years that had passed as those on Earth, giving the illusion of true simplicity of life. She had seen the construction of a great palace on the island, and had seen her father's departure from the island, and heard his instructions to tend to it until he returned again. He had not said when he would be coming back, but that he knew there would be more to see when he did. Shadow had promised her father she would look after this place and protect it, and so she had all these years, even as more and more people came onto the island shores to call this place their home. Only a few dozen or so called this place their home, but all the same they tended it well, always under the eyes of Shadow, the young woman they had come to call their queen. Despite these people calling her such, she was only the daughter of the king, not yet ready to be a queen. That time had not yet come, and wouldn't. She knew this better than anyone, for a long time yet. But Shadow was patient. Some, including her, knew patience to be one of her greatest attributes, though they all knew she was nowhere near perfect. The king was the only perfect one, Shadow told herself as a breeze came in front of the waves, curling between her long red locks of hair. She blinked away a fleck of dust and kept her eyes on the sea. Out there, in the distance, just on the edge of the horizon, was a storm. It had been raging for as long as Shadow had been watching over the island, having appeared not long after the king had embarked on his voyage. He hadn't mentioned where he was going, but despite everything, Shadow knew that the king hadn't been lost in the storm. He was too wise, too strong, and too brave to have been lost. He couldn't, because no matter where he was, he always knew the way. Whenever he decided to come back home, he would have no trouble finding it. He knew the island and the waters around it and everything beyond those waters because he had seen them before. Like Shadow, he had lived a long life, long enough to have seen practically everything there was to see. Shadow longed more than anything to see what the king had seen and what he was seeing, but she knew that a time such as that was still a long ways off. She was content with this, with everything and everyone she had. She had asked for nothing and yet gained so much. She had given everything she could and was respected and loved for it, though she cared nothing for the accolades she so often received, even for the littlest of things. She could never say or think anything negative of it, for if she did, she felt she would be betraying the orders of her father, the king of the land she now watched over in his stead. Every time someone here thanked her, she always insisted that it should be directed at the king rather than her. She was just a tool, a messenger, a figure of sorts to represent what the king was, what he stood for. Her thoughts, no matter the time or the place, were always on the king and his return, and the hopes he would see her work and be proud of what she had done. Everything she did, said, and thought was meant to praise him, and would continue to do so, even if she died long before the king returned. "I don't know when you're coming home, Father," she said to herself as she felt another breeze from the sea wash over her body. "But I hope your journey back is a safe and pleasant one. I'm excited to see you again. I'm watching over this place just like you asked. I hope I'm making you proud. I'm doing the best I can." She could only hope that all her effort would be worth it, that it would be enough. She could only hope, and when she couldn't hope, she prayed. She thought for a moment about praying, and this thought didn't betray her. She did pray, if only for a moment or two, knowing that her father could hear her wherever she was. He was wise and powerful like that, the strongest, wisest, most powerful king there had been. There had never been and never would be another king like him. He was the perfect king, the best king, and Shadow was glad to call him her father. She was almost lost in her thoughts when she felt a nudge on her right side. She looked down and saw her pet dragon, Fire Snapper, rubbing his face against her hand. She smiled, bent down, and gave him the attention he craved, listening to the sounds he so gleefully made as he relished in the affection. The king had given Fire Snapper to Shadow as a gift when she was young, and had made Shadow promise that Fire Snapper would be well cared for and looked after until he came back. Shadow had promised just that, and now here Fire Snapper stood on all fours, the healthiest and one of the most powerful dragons alive. Just this thought alone made Shadow remember the most powerful of the dragons on the island. A true titan. Megangander was the true protector of the island, the beast which the king had calmed and tamed and whom he had watched over for all his own years. Megangander was a living legend, to be found asleep in the mountains at the center of the island, waiting to be awoken, but only when the time was right. Megangander was considered also by legend to be the father of all dragons, but only because the king had given him the power and authority to stand as such. But Megangander hadn't appeared on the island for many years now, though that could be for better or for worse as far as Shadow was concerned. She pursed her lips thoughtfully as her gaze drifted away from Fire Snapper to the distant mountains far away. She squinted for a moment, almost trying to see Megangander's bulk still fast asleep. For better or for worse, you're still sleeping. I hope you won't have to wake up too soon. The world would be in quite a bit of trouble if you did. Better than that you stay asleep, for everyone's sake. She told herself this with great restraint, hiding the uncertainty and fear in her voice, trying not to betray herself by accident. Then Fire Snapper nudged her again, harder this time, and Shadow turned to look at him. He was looking out to sea at something that Shadow couldn't find. Without thinking, she prayed that whatever or whoever was out there was safe. Fire Snapper couldn't be looking at anything except the storm. It was the largest storm ever seen anywhere, reaching as far across the horizon as she could see in either direction. Shadow herself had never been into the storm before, thank the powers that be, but she feared it all the same, as those who had come to the island had themselves come through that violent fray. She watched the dark skies carefully, wondering what Fire Snapper might have seen. Whatever, whoever is out there, I hope you're safe. You will be soon. You're in good hands now. I'm praying for you. You're almost home again. Just hang on a little longer. She hoped, keeping her eyes on the horizon. Fire Snapper stood at attention alongside her, now his own gaze never leaving the waves and whatever was riding on them. So many, too many, had come in recent times from the sea. It was all Shadow could do to hope and pray that no more would suffer this long, perilous journey that ended the same way each and every time. She kept her eyes on the sea, waiting for whatever or whoever was coming. It was routine by now, one she had come to accept after the dozenth time or so, but it was never going to be a routine she was comfortable with.